Hello, and welcome to the Gaia update for the greater conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter that's happening on December 21st, 2020. I'm Adrienne Elise. This is an epic conjunction. These conjunctions between Saturn and Pluto happen about every 20 years, 19 to 20 years, and so they represent a generational shift. But this particular great conjunction is even more powerful as it's the beginning of a 200-year cycle, about 200 to 240-year cycle, where these triads happen in one element. They've been happening in Earth signs for the last 240 so years, and now moving into air signs. So this is what's called the Great Mutation, when this great conjunction moves into a new element. It's a really interesting year because this conjunction is actually, they're coming together at 29 degrees Capricorn and then moving together less than 1 degree apart as they move over into the sign of Aquarius, heralding the beginning of the Aquarian age. So the last time that these planets were so close together, these planets come into 0.1 degree apart. And the last time that happened was in 1623. But in that conjunction, the planets were close to the sun and so not really visible. So the last time that these planets came this close together and were visible in the sky was in 1226 in the medieval times. So it's been a long time, and it's quite a powerful energy because these planets, the biggest planets, the last visible planets, have been seen as the holders of time and chronology and culture. So as they come together, it represents a big change in our culture, like that generational change of every 20 years. So they are said to portend, these conjunctions portend great events, and they are often it's said that great events need one of these conjunctions in order to happen. So pretty powerful because it's like where we're at politically, socially, into our shift of ages and all the changes in our world right now. So this is a really important energy to pay attention to. It's interesting as you study the more ancient astrology, there was kind of a debate between whether or not this great conjunction energies are the conjunctions of these planets together, and also looking at Mars and when Mars comes together with Saturn and Jupiter, and then the eclipses as ways to say about events. And that's an interesting energy because we've just had this total solar eclipse in Sagittarius near the galactic center, and then this great conjunction. So either way you cut it, you're going to end up with a potential for some profound shifts and changes. So this trigon, this is a really interesting thing. It's beautiful, actually. When Saturn and Jupiter come together, the pattern that it makes in the sky is a triangle. So that means that each time it comes together, when you have a triangle, a trine in your chart, it's between the same elements, right? So fire trine, air trine, and that's exactly what these planets do as they come together. And so there's deep esoteric mysteries involved in these conjunctions. And because of this triangle shape that's made in the sky, and associated with the golden triangle, which is an energy of activation. So this triangle that's made in the sky, like I said, means that they hang out in the same element, and they've been in earth signs all the way since, like I said, 240 years. And so it was 1802 since these last planets came back together since 1802 that they've been in Earth signs. And so pretty powerful that we have them going into Capricorn and then Aquarius, speaking to this big shift of ages and the big shift of the age into the age of Aquarius. So when these planets, Saturn and Jupiter, are coming together for a great conjunction, which is every 20 years, and then if they're changing their triplicity, which is this change in the elements, that is called a greater conjunction. And so this is a greater conjunction as we move over into a new era. The movement from the earth elements in this triad or trigon into the air elements, where we are at now, is associated with the beginning of the Renaissance. So the air element has to do with communication, the arts, imagination, expression, intellectualism. And so it's pretty interesting, the connection to this time that we're in and technology, moving into the Aquarian age, which is associated with technological advances. And so these planets throughout this last period of time, of a couple hundred years, have been all in Earth signs when they've come together in the conjunction, except for 1981. They came together in the sign of Libra. And it's interesting to look back to 1981 when we had, that was the birth of the personal computer. This is also around the time when MTV was started, which was like 24-hour TV of music videos. Also 24-hour news came around that time. So it was kind of the dawning of the information age, and says a lot about this air triad we're moving into, as does the Aquarian age. What are we going to do with this technology? Is the technology going to control us, or are we going to have full knowledge of the advanced technologies, alien technologies that are being used against us right now? Are we going to come back into our place in the galactic society as we come into awareness of this technology? It's in our cell phones, but we're not actually told about this and the actual origins of this technology. So it's really tied up in disclosure of our true history of extraterrestrial interference in our world and with these technologies, and how we are on the verge of deciding, are we going to be a slave race to these higher technologies and energies, or are we going to come into our own as a culture and out of our galactic quarantine on Earth? Pretty interesting how it all lines up together. So this is a huge changing of time. And when these great conjunctions make a full cycle through the zodiac, that takes about 960 years. And so you can see how this is associated with the rise and fall of dynasties and kings and leadership in that 1,000-year cycle. So Saturn is seen as the keeper of time, or Chronos. It's like kind of this energy of karma and structure, discipline. It also has to do, though, with a record of the beginning of Earth evolution and kind of like a memory of what it is we're really all kind of trying to do here, which is an interesting energy. Now, Saturn is like father time. Jupiter is father life. Jupiter speaks to expansion, seeking, discovery, the future, and envisioning something better, and imagination. So when these planets come together, we're talking about timeline alignment and almost like a conference between father time and father life, and where are we going, what are we doing, let's get back on board the original plan. So it's interesting that Saturn is associated with the element of lead, the metal lead. And lead in the periodic chart, if you go further beyond lead, everything kind of comes back and defaults back to lead unless it goes radioactive. And so we're talking about this atomic clock. We're talking about the bigger cycles of time in this conjunction. Now, Jupiter is associated with the metal tin. And when you put tin and lead together, that makes solder, which is like what holds together circuitry and holds together joints. So you can kind of see that these conjunctions are about trying to hold together time and reality. And that's why they represent cultural changes and shifts and the energy of an era, the energy of a generation. So Saturn represents the old guard and Jupiter, the new kings. And that's why these conjunctions are associated with the rise and fall of kings, the rise and fall of dynasties, the rise of prophets, the overthrow of tyrannical political energies. So in a transition of power. And so it just very much fits the energy we're in right now. And in Greek mythology, Kronos is the king who overthrew his father, Uranus. And when Kronos finds out the plan of his children to overthrow him, which the sixth child was Zeus, he ate and killed and ate his children. It's kind of like goes back to the story of King Herod in the biblical times, and very interesting as this star is associated with the Star of Bethlehem, this conjunction, the Star of Bethlehem, and the Christmas star that foretold the birth of Jesus. And so it's pretty interesting that correlates. And then King Herod hears about the prophecy of this new king and goes out and kills all the babies. So we're talking about some powerful energies. And there's an energy of Saturn as the old. Now Zeus, when Zeus came, and Zeus was hidden by his mother and his grandmother, Gaia, and then was able to, take over his father. And the first thing he did was Gaia gave him an emetic, which caused him to throw up his children, right? Which is interesting because we've been talking about the puking phase, and that's kind of like another parallel here. And to kind of, a great purge that heals the wrongs of the past, And so then Zeus came into power. So there is an energy here of the old getting informed by the new, and the new getting informed by the old. And kind of seen by as astrologers throughout time as like a conference of these keepers of time coming together. And this is where we are at. So the last time these were this close of the 0.1 degree was in 1623. And of course, we said that they weren't that, most likely people didn't really see or know about this besides astrologers because they weren't visible. This one happened at 6 degrees Leo, which is opposite of where this great conjunction's happening close to 1 degree Aquarius. So very powerful mirror marker of this time that we're in. Now, what was going on in 623, Pope Urban VIII, he was the last pope to use force, arms, military to expand the reach of the Vatican. So that kind of speaks to the energy of these planets coming together. It was also when America was being settled. And very interesting energies there. Arrival in 1623 of 2 more ships arrived at the Plymouth colony, so expanding the numbers of the Plymouth colony. And I wonder if this has to do with the Powhatan, I believe, pronouncing that right, hopefully, Powhatan Indians. They attacked the Jamestown settlement and killed 300 settlers. That's a big energy with there's not very many people trying to establish this new world. And it speaks to everything these planets are about, as the tyrannical ruler being overthrown and the takeover and the control energies, and very interesting how this played out. And so this is when Thanksgiving was established by William Bradford, the leader of the Plymouth colony. And originally, Thanksgiving was a day of prayer. It wasn't a feast. It was like, are we going to make it through the winter? This is when we go to church and we pray really hard to make sure, because there was a drought this year in 1623. And so the settlers survived by fishing and eating seafood. And so it's a really interesting energy, because here's the settlers coming into this new world and basically just absconding, taking over the Native Americans' territory they've had, for thousands of years. And of course, the natives were doing just fine surviving, and then kind of watching these settlers try to make it. But those settlers were also incredibly brave people to come and face all of that, and these scary, savage Native Americans, so-called, right? So just a really interesting energy historically, because that was when there was these skirmishes going on. And I think probably those, I can see these new ships arriving, more people, the Native Americans being like, oh, okay, a couple of you maybe we can handle, but wait a minute. The writing on the wall, these white people are just going to keep showing up in more ships. When does it end? And I think that's probably where that attack on Jamestown colony happened, and probably a big blow and a big energy of fear for those settlers with a 300 people massacre, right? And then it's interesting how through these cycles of time and these Saturn conjunctions, about 3 to 5 years after the conjunction, there's typically very profound events that actually have to do with the conjunction. And we'll be looking at that as far as 3 years down the road in the astrology that's coming up. So in 1625, was it 1625? No, actually, I'm not sure exactly when this happened, but there was a peace conference that was held between the Powhatan Indians and the settlers. And this is a pattern that played out throughout the settling and the stealing of the Native American land in America. They had this peace conference, right? But it was like a retribution for the attack on Jamestown. It was used as an opportunity to actually murder the delegates. Like, hey, come on, let's have a peace conference, and then basically just using that as a way to murder those delegates. Those leaders happened over again again and again in the stories. So these planets, all about the overthrow of kings, the overthrow of societies, the rightful kings coming back into power, and overthrowing of tyrannical powers. And so it's just kind of interesting to check that out. Now, also in Europe, in Charles the First he was made king, coronated in 1625, so that 3-year marker after this conjunction. And there was an issue there with Parliament wanted to limit his permission to raise taxes. And that ended up in his execution. And because in 1626, he raised taxes anyway. And so there you go. Here's a story. And this whole taxation energy is really important as we look back to but the times we're in right now and the political patterns. And so looking back to the last visible conjunction of these planets in 1226. So when they were this close, that was also a great mutation in 1226 in the medieval period of time. And a great mutation meaning changing the elements, that 240-year cycle. And so that was also going from earth to air. And so what was going on in 1226? And this is really interesting because it was the period of time in England, King John, and this was the birth of the Magna Carta, which also has a charter that definitely has to do with that Charles the First story too. Same story in a way, because Parliament wanted to limit the power of King John, and by limiting his ability to raise taxes. Now, the Magna Carta had began in 1216, but the full version, or the one that stands today, wasn't ratified. The final ratification happened in 1225, just before this conjunction. So it has an energy of putting the king under the rule of law. It's just so huge in what was going on in the world today. Like, are we going to continue to have two sets of justice, which means no justice for the corrupt leaders that can do whatever they want, And then, of course, if they can do whatever they want, that means they can do whatever they want to us too. And tyranny is alive and well. So it's interesting because the Magna Carta was the precedent for the American revolutionaries to claim their freedom, asserting liberty from the English crown. So the Magna Carta was kind of the beginning of the American Revolution as well, these ideas, and definitely, came up again with Charles I. And whether or not the supreme authority, so Charles I represented the idea of the divine right of kings. And Parliament and the people were, was definitely challenging that. So interesting energies. Now, we've got the last time that these planets came together in Aquarius was in 1405. That was 615 years ago. This was associated with the birth of the last of 12 Constantines, representing that Eastern Roman Empire. And that was a 1123-year empire. So we're looking at that kind of, 1,000-year cycle. It fell to the Turks in 1433, and that was kind of the beginning of what led to the Renaissance. Now, 1405, let's see here. It was January 1405 that the last time this happened. And kind of an interesting energy there. There was a book that was published shortly after that called Image of the World by Cardinal Pierre Daly. And this involved apocalyptic revelations, talking about the revelations in the Bible and an apocalypse, and about a utopia. So this conjunction has long been associated with utopian ideas. It's interesting because there's also great tragedy energies, and fear of catastrophic events. But there's also this hope of a better future involved energetically. So that's kind of the energy of this Daly's book. And it's interesting because this Columbus, going back to the settling of America, Columbus had this book and had made notations in the edges of the book. And it shows that his travels, his desire, his passion, and to go out on these crazy expeditions, all were based on this book by this cardinal, and this energy of that, because the book had talked about that they could go west to get back east to India, right? So that was kind of the beginning of his journeys. And Columbus's whole thing was about getting to the east as a way to hopefully overthrow the corrupted world order and replace a new Jerusalem. So that was like the basis of his whole thing of discovering America. And that's interesting how that all played out. And then America being the ground where the frontline war with the global control energies is happening today. And that Columbus definitely got a bad rap, because of the tragedies that happened in the displacing of the native cultures. And yet it came from a place, his original, why he did all this, his passion was about this overthrow of tyranny. And so pretty interesting there. Now, the Renaissance energy started with this last air triplicity, and that we were talking about. And so it's interesting because the messages that have been coming through for the supernova soul about building new earth has to do with creative potential and working with our creative expression. And that was definitely the energy of the Renaissance, was the value of art in culture, the value of music in culture. And that that's how we become whole humans. That's our healthy society. And so powerful energy of a beginning of a Renaissance, a new Renaissance. And that's how we build. It's a very important piece of this new world. Kind of bridging together these conjunctions and the association with these conjunctions with these cultural revolutions. So this was seen as, the Renaissance and what lies ahead, kind of like an opportunity for a flowering of culture, science, vision, innovation. The Aquarian energy is about taking good care of the whole as the way to address the needs of the individual rights as well, and kind of brotherly love, taking care of each other. And so that's the energy that's being set and, kind of instigated with this great conjunction. Now we talked about this, so these ones, when they switch, like it's switching from, it's been in earth signs, now moving into air signs, and that is called a greater conjunction when that happens. Also the Great Mutation. Now, a greatest conjunction is when it's switching sign or switching elements, but going back to the original of zodiac. To the equinox point, to the end of the zodiac, which is Pisces, into the beginning of the zodiac, which is Aries, that vernal equinox point. So that is a great mutation when it goes from water to fire. The fiery trigon. And there's all kinds of associations with this greatest conjunction. And now, this is what the Christmas star was. This happened in 6, some people say 7 or 6 BC. And this conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter happened 3 times, and it happened in the sign of the fishes and the sign of the ram. And so that was the coming of the Messiah. This is like heralding the birth of this new leader, new spiritual leader, new religious leader. And it was so powerful, that greatest conjunction, when it's at this vernal equinox. And in the St. Matthew, the quote is the Gospel of Matthew. A quote about this star is that its light was unspeakable and its novelty caused wonder. So because these stars coming together in the sky made a super bright, it looked like one star, like one super bright star. And so the people took notice of this, and it definitely has this energy of prophecy. It's associated then with the birth of Christ consciousness, with new annunciations, great actions, new revelation, a lot of the themes that have been coming through in our current astrology. And so if we're talking about this Saturn Jupiter conjunction as a conference, that greatest conjunction that happened at the time of Christ, the birth of Christ consciousness, heralding the birth of Jesus, gave this conference new meaning, and it became about the Messiah and a rise of spiritual rebirth. Now, the Magi were astrologers, right? And so the deal with that is that they were, they saw the conjunction coming and happening, studying these things. And it's interesting because they came from the East. And what this was really about was that they were this conjunction was foretelling the birth of this new leader, this new king. And this they saw, the Magi, they saw this as the rebirth, the reincarnation of Zarathustra. Now, that's interesting because it's this story of them coming from the East. And the Eastern cultures, like the lamas of the East, will often proclaim, say, I'm going to reincarnate in this area, so they're looking for their lama, their teacher, and a lot of times these are stories, so many stories of like being aware of when their teacher is going to reincarnate and how to find them. So that's just a part of Eastern culture, right? And so really powerful that this connection of their teacher. So they were like, oh, this is telling us. So they were able to, from astrological study in this great conjunction, say, oh, our teacher's going to be born where? And that's what led them to Bethlehem, And then, of course, King Herod found out about this and called the Magi to him and said, when you find this king, come tell me. But the Magi didn't go back and tell him, right? Of course, that was this kind of going after all the babies, killing the babies to make, try to keep him staying in power. Exactly that replay of Kronos and Zeus. And again, the children and the innocents have been targeted in this time. They say that there's a lot of energy around the new souls, these super bright, super advanced star beings, never before come to Earth, coming and incarnating. And this attack on the children perhaps could be seen in the innocence, could be seen as a way to try to prevent these starseed souls from coming into their incarnation. Very interesting. So Zarathustra was also another name for him was Zoroaster, and that translates to golden star. And so we're looking at these triangles, the golden triangle, and this form of life. The triangle is also the geometry behind the Merkaba, or the light body, which is what Jesus was coming to show us about. We're just beginning to understand what this whole story is about, which is like, that's why this conjunction is just steeped in codes and prophecy and mystery throughout time, and very much fits this time that we're in. But this activation, so these conjunction represents an activation of the light body of this golden triangle, and bringing together of the East and West religions and philosophies and ancient wisdom. So the last time that we had a greatest conjunction, which was when it goes from water to fire, and that means Pisces to Aries, that was in 1583. Now, this is a really interesting energy because there was these Harvey brothers, and there's 3 of them, and they were astrologers. And the Harvey brothers had this, it was an interesting kind of sabotage, I think, if you look at the story in a bigger picture of astrology, because they were using sensationalism about, this is this conjunction and it's happening in this, moving in from the water to the fire, it's the end of the world. I mean, we've heard this again and again, right? And there was such hype and such fear that was put out in these publications around that time. And so people were all really paying attention. And then when these biblical prophecies of destruction is basically what they were saying, when they didn't happen, that was like the death of astrology. It was like people stopped believing in it and following it. It was when astrology was cut out of the sciences. Up until then, it was a kind of a popular part of, it was a valid part of science and philosophy, and everyday people would take into account astrology. So it was an interesting attack on astrology, I think. And it was, they did this huge thing of portending these, dark events. And their main prediction was 3 years after was when this was going to happen. So 1588. And the conjunction itself happened in 1583. So these Harvey brothers all agreed and made these publications, and there was other astrologers too talking about these, scary times. And then the youngest Harvey, John, disagreed and went back. Originally, he agreed, and then he went back and wrote another paper at the time. I think it was right at that 1583 year or 1584. And he's saying, no, this actually could be a utopian thing. This could be a really good thing. And so an interesting dynamic that happened there. And it brings up this energy of 3 to 5 years after, which is when you get the sextile of these planets. They come together in a conjunction. So we're going to be looking at that as we're moving into the future, because this great conjunction, it's happening on the solstice, but the effects of it, they can last up to 20 years. So we're looking at the whole next era, and the 10-year marker is when that the opposition happens. But with that sextile and the square have been associated with very powerful events. So what did they say? This fiery trigon, it just created fear in the masses, and it was the last judgment, Armageddon, right? It was like the second coming of Christ and this last judgment, and the world was going to end. And they talked about imprisonments, disturbances, tribulations, sorrows, tempestuous weather, and the world destroyed. And so when none of this happened, astrology was completely discounted, right? Because it had kind of gone mainstream. And although, let's look at 1588, right? That was the Spanish Armada. And so there was definitely an energy of this kind of coming home. Now, so there's definitely events that happen, but not the world-ending events that they had predicted. Now, the greatest conjunction of 1583 was a big deal because it was that, moving from the fishes to the ram and the fiery trigon. And the last time, it only happened one time since the time of Christ, of that Christmas star, and that was in 789. And this was just before the reign, during the time of the rise of Charlemagne. And Charlemagne was seen as uniter of the East and West empires in Europe. And so, again, associated with rise and fall of nations, changes in cultures, changes in religion, changes in leadership. And so in 1465, there was teachings by a Jewish historian, researcher, talking about an association with this conjunction with the redeeming of Israel, taking back Israel, and definitely an energy about how the new Messiah, the true Messiah, saying that Jesus wasn't the Messiah, true Messiah, the Messiah returning, humanity improving, the physical giving way to spiritual, pure souls who will continually contemplate God's essence. So a very interesting energy just associated with this conjunction, and the idea of Messiah, the idea of redemption, the idea of taking back a judgment and coming back to spiritual purity. So when we look at this association with the Messiah energy, is really interesting throughout time. So there was a great conjunction in 1396 BC that was 3 years before the birth of Moses. And that definitely lines up with the Christmas star and the birth of Jesus. So that's kind of interesting. In 543 BC, there was a great conjunction that was just before the release of the Jews from captivity. 34 AD, there was a great conjunction that portended the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome. So it's like this rise and fall of cultures and leaders and religions and all that. So in Jewish theology, it's really interesting if we're looking at this Chronos, the king, and the old king, the new king, the overthrow of kings, and this whole story. In Jewish theology, El, or Yahweh, was the universal ruler. This is associated with Saturn. And then Jupiter is associated with the Messiah and a transfer of power from that father god, the universal ruler, to the Messiah. So when these planets come together, it's kind of an energy of Yahweh giving a portion of his power to the Messiah, so that the Messiah could shatter the wicked principalities that hold sway over the earth. A great redemption, which is just so crazy how it fits this time of like where we're kind of being given our last chance to overthrow the AI takeover. And that this great conjunction is happening is a very potent and powerful message of perfect timing for this adventure. So this was the energy of condemning the wicked to punishment and exalting the righteous in their stead. So Jupiter, the Messiah, was this conjunction was seen as like the receiving of the power of the Father, and a connection in this new king, this Messiah, of the inexorable laws of the heavens, divine justice. And this really fits this period of time we're in too. So Jupiter and Saturn were seeing a conjunction seen as a periodic reconfirmation of the powers of God in the sight of those that are awaiting this Messiah, kind of like a reconfirmation, right? It's like that spiritual revelation energy and coming together. So these planets have been associated with this fear and judgment and catastrophe and the end of the world and Armageddon, but also utopian future. So in 1345, there was a conjunction in Aquarius, and that was with Mars. And this was associated with this reform of Christendom. Seen as a rising of a reign led by a ruler who will be righteous, just, and prophetic. And this is where we got this association with the utopian events. 1345, interesting, if you take that 3 years later, that was the Black Plague in 1347-48. So that 3-year marker after this attack of disease. Really interesting, because that was another thing about the 1981 conjunction in Libra. That was the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. And so there is a dark story of bioweapons, like maybe all disease created as an attack on humanity. And interesting how that Black Death came just after that mystical, magical conjunction. So this utopian idea is this justice that's going to vindicate the righteous and punish the guilty. And that was kind of what was in this book that Columbus had, Cardinal Daly's book, and talking about this possibility and the image of the world, this utopian world. And this is kind of, it's the same thing playing out, this new earth energy, and it's like all of these stories kind of culminating in this time that we're in right now. And so Columbus's voyages corresponded with these conjunctions. And so there's just an interesting connection there. Now, this is interesting. In 1504, there was a conjunction, an exact conjunction in Cancer, which is seen as the astrologers of the time saw that as an exalted place for Jupiter. And there's a really interesting story. So this was full-on Renaissance, Florence, and this was corresponded with the placing of Michelangelo's David sculpture. And it's kind of an interesting story where so at first they were going to put this sculpture, let's see, I've got my notes here. First they were going to put it in a niche on the side of the cathedral, which would be 60 feet up. And then they decided when they saw, the sculpture, so this meeting was held in January of 1504. And it was like, okay, where are we going to put this sculpture? Because it's way too special. And this rising star, Michelangelo, we need a special place for this. And who was at this meeting? Botticelli, Da Vinci was at this meeting. And so what they decided was to replace Donatello's statue of Judith that was in the plaza in front of the city hall, and replace that with the David. And so it's just an interesting correlation with this great conjunction, that the moving of the statue. So there was a lot of awareness of this astrology at this time. And in 1495, the Medicis, the powerful banking family, had been expelled from Florence, and they were in exile. So again, we're talking about the rise of the people against tyrannical authority. And this was exactly this energy. So there's this energy of this classical idea that that was written in a book in 1489 that was by Marsilio Ficino, 3 books on light. And it was a year before Michelangelo's Apprentice with the Medicis. And this talked about how ancient sages sought to secure the presence of divine beings by the erection of shrines and statues. Literally, the soul of the god or the planet can be drawn down into the statue, and have them, bring in the magic and the energy of that. And so this was an idea of the time. And this statue of David became like a civic totem representing the people's rising up against the tyranny of the Medici banking family. And so the Judith statue was also associated with this overturning of tyrannical energies. But at this meeting, they were saying that this Donatello's Judith was placed under an evil star. And so it was like it was a good place. It was a good reason to put this David statue, replace it with this Michelangelo's David statue. And it's really interesting if you look at it as this bringing down the divine energy, and David as a defeating Goliath, the giant. And this was part of the energy of Michelangelo's David, was that he was also defeating a giant, because this piece of marble that he was working with was called the giant, and Il Giante or whatever. And so because it was a huge piece of marble, and it had already been, one sculptor had already tried to sculpt with it and botched the job. And so by Michelangelo overcoming this giant, it was a metaphor, and the people of Florence overcoming the Medici control. So it's really interesting. And just for those decoders out there, it's just like, I don't know. But what happened was, they started moving the statue. So the energy was like, they were very aware of this conjunction, very aware of the power of the metaphor of erecting the statue. And so this seems to have been a big part of the deciding and the moving of this sculpture. So the exact conjunction was on May 25th at 16 degrees Cancer. They became 1 degree apart, slightly less than 1 degree apart, when they started moving the statue on May 24th. And then when they finished on June 8th, the planets were 1 degree apart. So the middle of the process of moving this sculpture corresponded with the exact conjunction. And so just as far as a timeline of what we're in right now, trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes in the decoding of what's happening in the world, it's an interesting thing to look at. So these planets, our greater conjunction that's happening, they became less than 1 degree apart around December 10th. So that was kind of a beginning marker. Then the exact conjunction is December 21st, and they come back. Jupiter's moving moves a lot faster than Saturn, and it's, as it overtakes Saturn, it's moves a little faster, they come out of the 1 degree marker around December 25th, Christmas. So if we're going to look at this metaphor of what's happening behind the scenes politically and who knows what, and the lining up of this great conjunction on the solstice and that total solar eclipse, it's like, so it's an interesting timeline between December 10th, 11th, 12th, around there, to December 25th, 26th. That is the time with the center being, at that, at this exact conjunction. So this is a timeline that if there were going to be metaphorically a pulling down of the powers of the ancients and the gods and the Messiah energy to support us in this time, this would be a very interesting timeline to work with, and so very just kind of fascinating story there. This you could research and talk about. I mean, there's just so much information about these great conjunctions and very strange connections with the present time and throughout history. So in 1603, there was a great conjunction that was associated with the crowning of King James I, which was King James VI of Scotland. That was the joining together of Scotland and England in monarchy. And so that's kind of fits this rise and fall of dynasties and kings. They said that if a monarchy begins with this great conjunction, it's long lasting. So there was 2 great conjunctions in fire, in the fiery trigon, one in Aries in 1762, one in Sagittarius in 1782, that were kind of like surrounded the whole time of the American Revolution. And it's interesting that the very beginning of the American Revolution, around 1772, 73, was when the shadow government started to be formed, started to start an energy against the crown. That was 1772 and 1773 was the Saturn Jupiter opposition that happened. And so there's correlation there. Now, also, the American Revolution was happening at the time, and that same time, 1772, 73, was also where Pluto is now in Capricorn, So it's like a cycle of Pluto going back through a full cycle of Pluto. There's also a connection to the stolen elections of 1824 and the great conjunction that happened in Aries 1821. And that's was the first time the term was used, a corrupt bargain. And it was a presidential election between Andrew Jackson and John Adams. And John Adams just had 1 term, and then Jackson went on to take the 2 terms after that, elected in 1828, reelected in 1832. And it was this energy of, let's see, where did I put it? Sorry, so much information. Of the Speaker of the House, let's see if I can find my notes, Clancy, who basically convinced Congress to vote for Adams because he was going to be made Secretary of State. So there you go. The kind of interesting energy going on here today. Then there's association with this conjunction and the Civil War. There was a conjunction in 1862, and then in 1865 is when Lee's surrender. So definitely this conjunction associated with the Civil War as well. And that was, Lee's surrender was right at the sextile in 1865. So we're looking at that 3-year marker around when the sextile happens. Very powerful marker of like what's happening today being resolved, or the next chapter of it. How these so the conjunction was in 1861 and 1862. So in 1862, Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus and went after the dissenters, right? And that's a very important time. Again, it relates to this time as well, too. In this writ of that had to do with this court case with Milligan, who was one of these dissenters, and it went to the Supreme Court to see if this was legal to kind of explore whether Lincoln had the power to do this. And then in 1865, it was determined by the Supreme Court that Lincoln had the right to suspend habeas corpus in this time of insurrection. So that was an interesting energy, and interesting that it also corresponds with Lee's surrender. So we're really involved in these chapters that have been playing out through history and playing out right now. And it's just absolutely fascinating. So in 1941, there was a great conjunction, and 3 years after was D-Day, the invasion of Normandy, and the beginning of the end of World War II. And so there was some powerful energies happening at that time as well. There was also a great conjunction in 1961 in Capricorn. That was, now JFK was elected in 1960, and then he was assassinated November 22nd, 1963. So that marker, 3 years around marker after that great conjunction. And during that time, we're talking about Kennedy had a fresh political philosophy, and he wanted to dismantle the CIA. It was focused on civil rights, breaking from the control energy of central banking system. And so that was all kind of connected to that great conjunction in 1961 in Capricorn. And that was 25 degrees Capricorn. Here we are having one at 29 degrees Capricorn. So we're kind of visiting back that time. And so when I said earlier, I couldn't find my date, sorry, these trigons have been happening in Earth science since 1842. So this era has been happening since then, except for that 1981 marker, the birth of the personal computer, and that was in Libra. So the 2000 conjunction was May 28th at 22 degrees Taurus, which is interesting because it kind of speaks to this whole energy of the Uranus and Taurus time. This was the last full Earth trigon and a conjunction, and it was in square to Uranus. So that's really interesting. So it was in Taurus, in square to Uranus, and it was a waxing square. And then now we're having, after these planets come together, they move into Aquarius, and then in January and February, Jupiter comes into a square with Uranus in January, Saturn comes into a square with Uranus in February. So that's we'll still be feeling the effect of this great conjunction. It's interesting that the one in 2000 was also in a square with Uranus. So that one was a waxing when the cycle was beginning, and this is the waning cycle. So very interesting energy. We'll be exploring that. But what happened in 2000, right? And that was this dot-com bubble. So it's interesting that 1981, birth of the information age, birth of the personal computer, and then the dot-com bubble, the whole Y2K thing. There was a Microsoft antitrust case, so these are the energies associated with these conjunctions. And, then looking at 9/11 in the wake of this conjunction, there's definitely kind of a connection to that. So then when we look further into the future, because we're talking about this interesting 3 to 5 year period of time. So if it's a 20-year cycle, the opposition is going to happen in about 10 years, and the next conjunction 20 years. The squares will happen in about, at 5 and 15. And then the sextile, something about this sextile, like energy of when these planets come back together. So let's explore this timing. Also, in the same time, we've got Pluto. So this year has all been about Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto all coming together in Capricorn. And just these big player planets, And so now it's really epic, and it's going to be a huge shift of energy. I know I keep saying this, and I can feel people being like, this Capricorn energy is just like so dense and so heavy, like it's so materialistic. And it's important to keep in mind in this trigon, since 1842 or whatever, 1842, all these dates, numbers, we've been in Earth this whole time. And Earth is practical, it's orderly, it's materialistic, really the building of our modern financial systems and everything. And now moving into the air trigon, it's a whole different energy, and we've been in a bloom, kind of like we're in a bloom. We've been in a bloom of the Piscean age, controlling humanity, energies that happened through the Piscean age. We're in a bloom of this air trigon or earth trigon, because the actual conjunction exact is so close. It happens in Aquarius, but they're still less than 1 degree apart at 29 degrees Capricorn. So we've got both, where it's so interesting because it's like Jupiter and Saturn together moving into the sign of Aquarius is saying beginning of the Aquarian age. The air trigon beginning in Aquarius, in this new era of air energy, it's shift of ages. It's this great lining up. And so that's why it's just so important for us to pay attention to what's going on right now. And I thought maybe it's, to understand the historical significance of these great conjunctions. So let's look at moving forward in this 3-year marker and what's coming ahead. So now, what I was trying to say is that Saturn and Jupiter now moving into Aquarius, they're not going to go back into Capricorn anymore. They're done. They're going into Aquarius. But Pluto remains in Capricorn. So I was kind of getting this message that for these next 3 years, while Pluto is still in Capricorn, it's like a bridge between these realities, between the Gaia timeline, the new Earth energies, and the old paradigm. And it's kind of like we're going to be kind of existing with both, and a bridge for souls to be able to jump over into the new paradigm in this next 3-year period, which really fits the whole story of these great conjunctions. So now Pluto will move into Aquarius just for a couple of months in 2023. So in March 2023, Pluto moves into Aquarius. Pluto moves back into Capricorn in June of 2023. So 2023 is going to be a really shifting year, kind of like this year. We had Saturn jump over into Aquarius for a few months and then back. So also in June 2023, there's the sextile that happens. So the Jupiter-Saturn sextile will be Jupiter in Taurus, sextile Saturn in Pisces at 7 degrees. So that is a very powerful time. And that's when the first sextile happens. And how crazy that it's the exact same month that Jupiter moves back into Capricorn. And so then in January 2024, the same thing happens, is that Pluto moves into Aquarius, and Jupiter and Saturn have their second sextile, also in Taurus and Pisces. So January 2024, 3 years and 30 days, pretty much, from this conjunction. Massive shifting. And the sextile, so what's this about? The sextile that will happen in June 2023 and again in January 2024, but that's really when Pluto moves into Aquarius. That's the official beginning of the Aquarian age, I would think. We're in a 3-year transitionary cusp energy, and when Pluto moves over for good into Aquarius, January 2024, there we go. And so this sextile is really important. Jupiter in Taurus sextiling Saturn in Pisces. So Saturn in Pisces is going to be this replay of the Piscean age, right? And it's almost like it's almost like all the truth, that all the things that are happening behind the scenes right now, the movie of that truth, the like ability for us, the regular everyday American, to know what happened, what's happening, what's been happening in this crazy time of all this secret stuff going on behind the scenes. Like the full revealing of that story probably won't be until 2023, 2024. I mean, we're still waiting on the JFK files, so 9/11, come on, let's get some disclosure here. But it's pretty interesting. It's going to take 3 years for all of this truth to come out. And I guess that will be 9/11. That will be all of the dark, dark things that have gone on to control humanity. And what's gone on in the divine plan, and the plan to save humanity. And that will be fully revealed at this time. And that's really interesting, because if you know this phrase, trust the plan, and the secret military operations that potentially could be going on right now, and we're waiting to figure out, and we're all trying to find out what's the plan and when is something going to happen. And we have this crazy lining up of energies for this solstice, and like, what is this going to happen? Is this solar flash? Is this the polar shift? Is this the Armageddon? Like, is the world over? Is this the day of judgment? Is this when the true leaders come forward and take back control from the tyrannical AI energy? But it's kind of like we're all like, trust the plan, and everybody wants to know what the plan is and try to figure out what the plan is. And from studying this astrology, I'm like, oh, I think this is the plan. I think this astrology is the plan. It's like we don't get to know what exactly this is. This is the divine plan, and the lining up of this messianic conjunction with the solstice and this total solar eclipse on the galactic center. And so the plan we're all trying to figure out is the divine plan. It's a divine timeline. And it's playing out astrologically. And so it's kind of interesting. It's like, I think there's an actual political plan too. But then when you take the technology of the Project Looking Glass and, being able to get a sense of what's coming and the effect of actions in the future, this studying this astrology is like, oh, nobody knows the plan. Nobody knows the plan, except for that we do know that divine timeline wins and God wins in the end. And knowing that, though, doesn't mean that we don't need to show up and play our part, play our role in this great stage of events. Sometimes studying deeply to try to figure out what's going on leaves you with a completely less of a clue, just shows you how much you don't know. And so really interesting energies. But so January 2024, we got the sextile. So Jupiter and Taurus. Jupiter is about expanding and bringing more and luck and opportunities. And that's Taurus rules money, financial systems. So that might be a time of a financial shift. In sextile, a harmonious solutions to Saturn and Pisces. Saturn reliving the Piscean energy of, it's almost like that Saturn in Pisces is about releasing the magic of that Piscean age and taking back the energy of spiritual revelation from the religious control that took it over. And that correlates with a new relationship to wealth, a new expanding of wealth, earth wealth. It's interesting because there's rumblings of how much control China has gained through infiltration of our country, and thinking about how logical it is that a country with overpopulation would want the breadbasket of the abundance of Colombia, our goddess, America, in the American Revolution. The revolutionaries saw that they were defending this abundant goddess, this Colombia, this garden this wealth of this land to be able to produce food. And it's like, how far have we gotten away from that? That we're just on the verge of losing complete control over our food chain, and all of those ideas that we've had when we were younger of like wanting to be sustainable, wanting to have our gardens and have our local community and our local energy of barter and having everything we need nearby. And then we all got caught up in the system of no, go make your money. No, you got to survive, pay your bills, da 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 da. And it's like we could never go fulfill those utopian dreams. But that's a big energy for these next 3 years, for sure. Like, whoa, I think we might want to take back control of our agriculture, take back control of the sacred power of this land to produce nutrition in a healthy way without the poison, toxic GMO chemicals, and just very interesting how it lines up. So that sextile in January and Pluto moving over to Aquarius is going to be a big, big shift. And I don't know, I don't like to, most astrologers and people who go to see astrologers, they want to know the future and they want a prediction, right? That's been kind of the pattern. And I don't do that. I don't do future and I don't do predictions because the future can be more amazing than we can even imagine. And why would you want to mess with that? You don't want to mess with that. But I'm going to say maybe January 2024 is a really great time for a financial reset. And there's definitely talk and energies of that going back to the gold standard. This was part of the original ideas that came through, in the Kennedy administration and why he was targeted. And so pretty interesting how that's playing out. Now, we want to look at the square of these planets because that's a tension point that is going to directly relate to what's happening now in 2020. So the square of these planets, really interesting. There's 2 of them. There's one in December 2024 and June 2025. December 2024 is between Saturn in Pisces and Jupiter in Gemini, mutable signs. June 2025 is between Saturn in Aries and Jupiter in Cancer, cardinal signs. And cardinal signs are about mutable signs and adjustment. Cardinal signs, a new beginning, starting something, a new pattern, a new cycle. And so 2024 to 25, that's a really interesting energy there. And so December 2024, June 2025. Now, the December 2024 one happens on Christmas. So, whoa, 4 years after, of course, we'll have had an election. And December 25th is when this exact square happens. So it'll be interesting to see that. And then November, December 2025, it starts a trine. So this is a beautiful energy of the trine that happens between these planets. And that will be November, December 2025. And that's going to be in water with Cancer and Pisces. Then there will be a trine in 2026, end of August into September, that will be in fire. And so that's an important energy. And that's kind of really when this all harmonizes, like really the beginning of this new age, I guess. Systems and establishments, the changes that we're going through, kind of coming more into form. Now, it's interesting because this... we want to look at the opposition too, because the opposition happens 10 years later, and there's definitely an energy. So that happens December 22nd, 2029. Jupiter will be in Scorpio, Saturn in Taurus. And so that's a powerful energy. Again, we've got that financial rebirth, reset energy, and April 24th, 2030 and November 20th, 2030. Now that one is going to be between Sagittarius and Gemini, that opposition in 2030 in November. So again, it's like this switching signs. This whole next 10 years is this kind of like whole new systems being put into place. And so there you go. Now, this conjunction, like I said, great conjunctions throughout time have been, even if they're 1 degree apart, they're still a great conjunction. And the fact, what's unique about this year's conjunction is that, of course, it's the cusp moving into Aquarius and this new triad, a Great Mutation, but it's that how close they're going to be. 0.1, that's like an eclipse, Jupiter eclipsing Saturn. So it's like that new king eclipsing the old king. And in the supernova story, this is about the rise of the enlightened true leaders, and we talked about the lineages. There's like maybe you've heard of Gregory Hallett, and he's from New Zealand. And apparently all this prophecy, it says that he is the true heir to the throne in England and the UK, and that this is undisputed at this time. There is a whistleblower, a Chinese whistleblower, who has exiled from China, who has come forward with disclosure, whistleblowing about China's involvement in the U.S. elections this year. And he's royal blood. So the true royal families, the true leaders, the true enlightened leaders, the new kings and queens are coming into power. And that's a really powerful energy for the supernova soul, because I've been talking about the supernova soul concept. A big part of the story of the supernova soul is this energy of the reluctant leader. You've been a leader in your past life, and then you got overwhelmed with that responsibility as a sensitive soul, and you said, nope, never doing that again. And yet now is your time to step back on that stage. And this rise and fall of kings and the true leadership, the Redeemer, the Judgment Day, it all's lining up right here, right now for this beginning of the second coming of Christ consciousness, birthing through these advanced souls into a field, holding this Christ consciousness in a field on the earth that's available more directly for people to access. How is that happening? Through you, supernova soul, coming into your power, into your potency, landing home here in your bigger potential. That's what this astrology is about for you. A step on that throne. There's huge energies with the Capricorn energy of taking back our power, our authority, where we gave it away to false prophets, false leaders, false messiahs, energies of control that have been tinkering with our DNA, the Galactic Federation, playing like they're our supreme rulers, And it's like, yeah, supreme ruler right here. Body of light, like light body activation, golden triangle, like a full circle on this story. And coming back to our own autonomous spiritual power, and that there is not a power outside of you that has power over you, and the whole story of misusing your power was when you were working outside. It's first of all a lie, but it only happens when you're working outside of the divine timeline. If you're in alignment in your heart, your cosmic heart, and with Gaia and the divine timeline, you can't miscreate. It's not possible. Also, miscreations in the past have been used with technology outside of the physical body, amplification devices. So we're working only with our own body. We're working in alignment with the divine timeline and coming back to the redemption, the purified soul, the advanced purified soul, the supernova soul, and it's like, it's not possible to misuse your power in that alignment. And it's time to come back into your autonomy and your power. And it's time for humans to stand up and say, hey, you guys, all you cultures out there that have been tinkering with our DNA, playing God and trying to control us, it's like game over. We're not playing anymore. Game over. You no longer have authority to tinker with my DNA. And it's this revealing, as much as you can cover up and program and mess with the DNA, which is exactly what this vaccinations try to do, modifying. But you know what? It's like what I've been shown in the DNA healings that happen in individual sessions is that the light codes, those Christ consciousness golden codes, they come in different, there's different energies around these different codes that people have, but they're incorruptible. And it's time for the great Redeemer, us to redeem ourselves, back into our purified consciousness and get rid of the plague, the disease that's affected humanity, which is all about stealing the magic and the mystery and the force of spirit, disconnecting us from our own connection to God, saying, oh, you have to go through us now and you'll have to pay the price. You're going to have to pay some taxes. You're going to have to do it right. You're going to have to confess your sins. Maybe if you're really lucky and you work really hard, you might get one little message, crumb of the light of God. I was like, oh, wait, no. Waking up, humanity waking up, and you leading the way of the true consciousness of what science has already shown us, but that you are a particle, a fractal of God consciousness. You have everything accessible right inside of you. And taking back our reality, and coming into our autonomous power and taking back our timeline, divine timeline, landing home. So the convergence of events, synchronicities, numbers, mysteries, codes, prophecies, epic time we're in right now. So be present with this. And a lot of information here, but as I started studying this greater conjunction, it was just like the rabbit hole, and all of these crazy synchronicities with what's going on right now and timelines. And may we erect that statue of David. Yeah, again, the defeater of the giants. And it's interesting though, because it's like you are the giant. This is the deal is that there's a giant part of you, this multi-dimensional, higher dimensional being. And the whole story, the catastrophe, the fall of Atlantis, and the misuse of power story was all just to keep you from, never ever coming back into your power. And the only way that the controllers and the AI agenda can keep control of our planet is if these souls don't remember who they are. And isn't this the second coming, the great redemption? The landing home, the embodiment. See, the deal is that as a supernova soul, you've already been embodied on this earth before, more in your power. And that soul memory lives within you. And this is what's happening. When I see in like the esoteric understanding of this time for the supernova soul is that kind of like the erection of that statue, bringing down the wisdom of the sages, embodying it on earth. It's accessible for humanity. And you are that embodiment of this Christ consciousness, making it accessible for humanity. Just no big task, no big deal, right? And you don't get to know what's coming. You don't get to know the plan. But we're here and we made it and we're in it together. And so don't miss this time of mystical spiritual revelation. Reach out and grab a hold of your direct connection to God consciousness, to spirit, to levity. This most recent period of time from 2000 has been about technological control trying to cut us off from our connection to spirit and source. And of course, throughout time. And so our natural state is levity and joy and connection. And it's like, that seems like an impossible dream. But that's the natural state. And when we're talking about this corrector energy, this is this Jupiter Saturn coming together to get back on the divine plan, Saturn holding the original divine plan and handing off that message to the Messiah to bring it to us, the new king. And so we're resetting, and that means you resetting to your full potential and power. And that's you playing the role of claiming back God consciousness, levity, joy, feeling connected. And it's crazy to think that this has become something that we don't even believe is true. We bought into the fact that our natural state is depression, disconnection, hopelessness. What's the point? No. And that's this energy of Aries, Mars and Aries now coming into its third and final square with Pluto on this solstice, the same time as this great conjunction exact. And awakening our power to directly connect to the I am consciousness, to be that living, breathing, ecstatic experience that life is meant to be. And we do this and build new earth, this through the arts and creativity. When you're in that creative process, this is the gold of the new paradigm, is this creation energy. And we get so caught up in like, oh, I want to make a product, and then people will like it and maybe they'll buy it and I can put it on the wall and yada, 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 right? And it's really hard to get out of that energy. But the gift and the wealth of the creation energies is like when you're in it, you're co-creator. That's when we're a co-creator. And we're trying to co-create to build new earth, so that co-creator energy, go this season, take care of yourself by grabbing a hold of one of these projects you've always wanted to do, or you put aside, or, always takes the back burner, this creative project, and go claim that back into your life, and that zest for living. When people are in that creative energy, they have a totally different energy around them. When you're in a project and you're like on fire about this creation energy and what you're working on, and, beyond the product and what it's going to be and what people think about it, those people that are in that energy, the concerns and worries of everyday life and the drama and the heaviness, that just goes away. It doesn't even matter because they're on fire, and this is this, Mars retrograde coming back now, direct third and final square with Pluto, exactly when this great conjunction happens. It's time for us to claim back that direct connection. And that's what you're here to do. So we have this conjunction from the 23rd to the 25th of December is when these planets are at 29 degrees Capricorn. Then from the 21st to the 23rd, they're at 0 degrees, 1 degree, close to 1 degree, The official prognosis is that this is at 1 degree, but it's really at further into 0 degree, 0 degrees. Here we are, the Fool card in Tarot, 0 degrees Aquarius. This is exactly like, okay, jump off the cliff into the new age. But anyway, so that conjunction happens from the 21st to the 23rd, where they're close again, and the exact conjunction happening on the 21st, that solstice. So here we are in it to win it, and be present. Don't miss a moment. Find that star of prophecy in your life, that direction back home to your cosmic consciousness embodied right here. It's a living, breathing example. And don't miss a moment. And remember, we're here together for this. And this is the beginning for supernova souls. This next 3 years for us is this next chapter where we're moving in the creation energies. We're finding each other. We're getting back to work on the projects we came here to work on. We've been working on these little Renaissance projects throughout time, and these different cultural experiences. That's supernova souls moving through time, bringing these impulses. And so you planted these little seeds throughout history, and it's time to get back to work. Find those people. What the supernova soul really wants is that feeling of being at the right place at the right time, doing what you're here to do with the right people. And that's what this next 3-year period is about. The next chapter, 2021, finding each other, figuring out who has the puzzle pieces to these projects, and a fun, creative celebration. And that is what our marching orders have to do with. So have a wonderful, beautiful, sacred season of light returning to you, to your life, levity, joy, hope, into the earth as well. This is your job and your role here. And so bless you. for being here and making it through all you have for this sacred moment in time. And may we move forward in a whole new way together in this next chapter of adventure and creative fire and expression. So thank you so much for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Until then, I'm Adrienne Elise. Namaste.